Welcome to Soz Talks Money, where all we talk is money. I'm your host, Adam Sosnick, and I'm here to help you build wealth and to save that money. Today, we're going to be breaking down the CARES Act, which is the $2.2 trillion economic stimulus plan. Are you ready? Let's talk money.
All we talk is money. All we talk is money. All we talk is money. All we talk is money.
Now, before we take a deep dive into the CARES Act, as you can see behind me, a lot of different colors, a lot of different numbers, a lot of different moving parts. Let's just cover one thing. This is really complex stuff. Now, what's our goal? Our goal is to simplify money and break down money into a language you can understand. So by the end of this video, you're going to take all this complicated stuff and say, you know what? I kind of get it now. Thanks, Soz. All right, let's jump into it. Now, what I have right here is what I would call not so fun facts. Facts that aren't exactly easy on the ears. Not so fun fact number one, here we go. Our current national debt is $26 trillion. Not million, not billion, we're talking trillion. Now here's a question for you. Do you know how much $1 trillion is? I mean, I'm sure you can do the math, but do you actually know what $1 trillion really means? Let me break it down to you in a story. If you and Jesus go into business and you guys start a wine business, you're selling wine as an example, and you and Jesus are making $1 million every single day. Boom, million, boom, million, boom, million, every single day. And you add it up 2,020 years later, do you know how much money you would have? $737 billion. You wouldn't even have $1 trillion, you and Jesus Christ. So, with that being said, we're going to break down the $2.2 trillion economic stimulus plan known as the CARES Act. When I talk trillions, this is no joke. Hope that story resonates with you. Now, with that being said, now that we understand what $1 trillion really is, let's break down this $2.2 trillion economic stimulus plan. So, the CARES Act, right? What does it stand for? It's not just some cute name that someone came up with. Hey, we care. No, it actually stands for something. What does it stand for, you ask? Well, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act. That worked out real nice. Now, this was signed into law March 27, 2020. All right, so we've all heard of the CARES Act. We've all seen it thrown around a little bit. But today we're going to really understand what it does for you as an individual and for industries in America. So it was signed to protect the American people and industries from the health and economic impacts of COVID-19. So we're all familiar with what happened in 2008 during the Great Recession. Well, let me tell you something. This stimulus package, the CARES Act, was the largest economic stimulus plan in modern history, more than doubling that of the 2008 Great Recession. These are massive, massive numbers here. We covered what $1 trillion really means. This is $2.2 trillion. Now that it's officially a recession, 40 million jobs have been lost. Unemployment rate is now in the double digits. Here comes the CARES Act, infusing money into the system. What we're going to do right now is we're going to break down the 5 major components of the CARES Act. All right, component number one, this went to individuals and families. This was a total of $603.7 billion. This made up 30% of the CARES Act. Let's break that down. Now, of this amount that went to individuals and families, $300 billion was in the form of cash payments, which you'll see here in stimulus checks, which we'll cover. $260 billion of that went to unemployment, which we will cover as well, unemployment benefits. And last but not least, $44 billion of that went to student loan payments. FYI, if you did not know this, student loan payments are suspended until September 30th of 2020. Now, component number 2 went to big businesses. This is big corporate bailouts. Now, this is $500 billion, which is 25% of the entirety of the CARES Act. $425 billion of that was in total of corporate loans, but the bulk of that went to the airline industry. $58 billion went to the airline industry. Number 3 was small business, which is a total of $377 billion, which made up 19% of the CARES Act. This was administered by the SBA, the Small Business Administration. They were responsible for doling out loans. New loans made up $350 billion of this 377. Now, $17 billion of it went to relief of existing loans, and only a puny $10 billion was in the form of grants. Now, the difference between grants and loans, grants, free money. You don't got to pay that back. Loans, you got to pay that back. Component number 4 went to state and local government in the amount of $340 billion. That's 17% of the entire amount. $274 billion of that went to COVID response. $66 billion of it went to schools, education, childcare, and family services. And last, component number 5 went to public services. That's $180 billion, which is 9% of the entirety of the CARES Act. Now, the majority of that, $100 billion, went to hospitals and healthcare providers to deal with the coronavirus. Now, the rest of that went to veterans, stockpile equipment, CDC, food, and drugs to deal with the ramifications of COVID. So now that we've covered these 5 major components, let's get more into what this means for you and your money. This is all based on tax filings of who received these stimulus checks. Now, if you're single and you're making $75,000 or less, you more than likely received a $1,200 stimulus check. That's the number for $75,000 or less. And what I'm going to do is run you through a couple different examples depending on what you've made, how much money you would have received. Right? So if you're single, $75,000 or less, $1,200. If you make $85,000, you're receiving a stimulus check of $700. And last but not least, if you make $99,000 or more, zero money for you. So that's how that works. Now, head of household, this is the second component of these stimulus checks. You make $112,000 or less, here's your number, $1,200. $125,000, you get $575 from the government, from the IRS. Last but not least, here's the number. You make $146,000, another goose egg for you. No money. The more you make, the less money. Now, last but not least, married couples. Married couples, if you're filing jointly, you make $150,000 or less, you're getting $2,400. That's just $1,200 and $1,200. That equals $2,400. That's basic math for you right there. Now, you make $175,000. That's $1,150 in the form of a stimulus check. So, last but not least, you're making $198,000 as a family, as a married couple. Another goose egg for you. All right, so a couple more pieces of information. You have children, 16 or under. That's $500 per child. So let's just do some basic math here. Family of 4, right? Family of 4, you're receiving $3,400 from the IRS. That's how that works. Here's a couple little pieces of information for you. You should understand this. This money is not taxable. Stimulus checks, not taxable, meaning you're not going to be paying any taxes on a stimulus check. Now, another piece of information, there's a lot of scams out there, a lot of scams. People want to take advantage of people receiving money. Here's my piece of advice for you. The IRS will never contact you via email. They'll never contact you via text. They're never going to hit you on social media. It's only through the mail. So if anybody's reaching out to you other than via the mail from the IRS, do not respond. That's probably a scam. All right. So for more information on this, here you go. 3 letters, irs.gov. Go check out irs.gov. That's where you can find all information regarding stimulus checks. Go look into that. Now, here's a little thing that I've been doing some research of where I've gotten all these numbers. I had fun with this. You might not have fun. You can check out the Forbes stimulus calculator. You can punch in how much money you make. You're married, you're single, you're head of household, adjusted gross income. You can kind of play around with it and see how we came up with these numbers. That's on the Forbes stimulus calculator. All valuable information right there. Now, why were these stimulus checks so important? Well, let me tell you something. I don't know if you know this, but 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That's up from 75% only a year ago. With that being said, in addition to the $300 billion in the form of stimulus checks, now we're talking $260 billion in the form of unemployment benefits, aka unemployment insurance. Now here's the difference between stimulus checks and unemployment benefits. Stimulus checks, not taxable. Now what we're going to cover right now under unemployment, taxable. Now, I did some research. 1 out of 3 people don't even understand that unemployment benefits are taxable. So now you know. The more you know. Traditionally, if you're unemployed, you go through your state Department of Labor, your unemployment department. That's where you start. Now, with Corona going on, there's a joint state and federal program. And let me break down what this means to you at home. Right. So here we go. So number 1, if you are unemployed, you start with your state, and what will happen is that most states will automatically enroll you into the federal program. So now let's get into these numbers and what this actually means for you at home. So most eligible Americans receive an additional, keyword here, an additional $600 on top of what they would normally receive from their state unemployment insurance. So the state national average per state is $378. So let's just break that down. If the state national average of what you will receive for unemployment is $378, now you're adding $600 on top of that. The average American is walking away with $978 a week. That's over $50,000 a year. Here's the key part: to stay home. To be exact, 2 out of 3 out-of-work Americans are earning more to stay home during COVID than when they were actually working. Does that blow your mind a little bit? I don't know. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? Should people be making more money to stay home than when they were actually working? I'd love to get your input on that. Please let me know in the comments below. But here's the catch. Here is the catch right now. So this $600 a week of unemployment as of now is supposed to end on July 31st. So that's coming up. That's coming up. So July 31st is when it's supposed to end. Again, 2 out of 3 out-of-work Americans are making the equivalent of $50,000 a year to stay home. So a couple little facts for you. The states with the highest unemployment, let me break that down. We got Hawaii, we got Michigan, and we got Nevada. States with the lowest unemployment: Connecticut, Minnesota, and Nebraska. The highest weekly payment, the state that pays the highest weekly benefit, Massachusetts, paying $823 to an unemployed individual. State with the lowest unemployment payment, well, that's Mississippi. If you live in Mississippi, that's only $235. That's a $600 weekly difference. All right, so speaking of $600, this $600 a week is supposed to end July 31st, as we've discussed. So what's next? Let's discover what's going on next. So Donald Trump, President Trump, is signaling at more stimulus checks. He's basically saying that they're going to be very generous and big, beautiful checks headed in your direction. He's saying, quote unquote, we will be doing this. So what will we be doing? We're about to find out. Well, it's no secret there was a $3 trillion HEROES Act that the House of Representatives passed about a month ago. The Senate basically said it was DOA, dead on arrival, but that potentially will extend the $600 a week of unemployment, continue $1,200 checks, and FYI, this, as we discussed in the trillions, will be the largest stimulus package ever passed in America if it happens. So what I do know that will happen is that in July, we will have answers. Why July? Because obviously this ends July 31st, and then there's a 2-week recess. Congress is going away for the July 4th holiday starting July 3rd. They're coming back July 17th, and by that point, we're going to probably have some answers. Last piece of what's next, obviously the one thing we don't know about is COVID. So with COVID, cases are on the rise. States were closed down, businesses closed down, they reopened too soon, now they're closing back down again. It's one big yo-yo going up and down, so we don't know what's going to go on with that, so the story continues. So now, with all this being said, we've thrown together all these numbers, we see stimulus checks being thrown around, unemployment benefits, different colors, different parts of the economy. How does this affect you? Point number 1, short-term versus long-term. Short-term, you might be collecting unemployment money. You might have received a stimulus check. Long-term, you're going to want to avoid being on what I call the government program. Avoid that as much as you can. So the next time something like this happens, whether that's in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you're going to be off this list and fending for yourself. Point number 2, a budget. A budget is a game plan for your money. And let me break something down for you. There's something in the budgeting world called the 50-30-20 rule. What does that mean? Now, what it stipulates is 50% of your income should go to your needs, 30% should go to your wants, and 20% should go to your savings. Now, here's my advice for you. Right now, you should be prioritizing your needs more than anything and your savings more than anything. Cut out your wants. This isn't the time to be getting stuff that you don't really need. Cut out your wants, focus specifically on your needs and on your saving. Point number 3, paycheck mentality. A paycheck mentality, as we discussed, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. What you're going to want to do is graduate to a net worth mentality. So next time something like this happens, you're not relying on the government for your next check. Graduate to a net worth mentality. Point number 4, now's not the time to be traveling. Now's not the time to be partying. Now's not the time to be balling out. If you are collecting these checks, what I would recommend, the best investment you can make is actually the opposite, paying off debt. If you have high interest credit card debt or high interest loans, I would take care of that immediately. Point number 5, you're going to hear me say this all the time, save that money. You're going to need it. I've been saying save that money for years. Coronavirus hits and all of a sudden people need to be saving that money. For most people, you need to save up $10,000 as a cushion. God forbid something like this happens again. Last point is you need to invest. Specifically, Invest in yourself. You want to increase your market value and recession-proof your life. So the next time something like this happens, you're again not on this list. So that's my take on the CARES Act, and you know that once this HEROES Act is passed, we will be covering that right here on Valuetainment Money. Now, if you want to know how money works, check out this video called The 20 Rules of Money. Very informative. And if you have not, please subscribe to Valuetainment Money. We're going to be covering stuff just like this on the regular. And as always, save that money.